I welcome you all to the session of engine system and performance, and today we shall try to know about several engine components and their arrangements. You have studied internal combustion engine in your undergraduate course, and then you have seen that there are several components in an engine, and all these components are essential. All components are there to serve certain purposes, and those components are interlinked to bring together the best performance of an engine. So, if we look at the schematic depiction, we can see that there are many components. In this schematic, I have shown a few major components, but these are not only the components we should discuss today. There are even more components, and we shall discuss them in our subsequent classes. So, to start with, we shall focus on the most important component, that is the block. So, what is block? Engine block, you can see that block houses cylinders, engine cylinders, and for the older engines this block used to contain, older engines, block of older engines used to have valve ports. So, this block is basically an important component in which we can see that a cylinder is there, and inside the cylinder there will be a piston that we will discuss later. Not only that, if you look at that, this block also contains this water jacket. This water jacket we have discussed beginning that these water jackets are important because if it is a water cooled engine, we need to supply water as a coolant to transfer certain amount of heat from engine cylinder into the coolant, so as to prevent mechanical failure of several components, several other components. So, that is water jacket, and if engine is not water cooled engine, if it is air cooled engine, so for air cooled engines, block includes exterior surfaces, and these exterior surfaces have fins, so as to promote heat transfer. Next, if we go to, so basically block, as I said you, block is an essential element. That block contains cylinder or cylinders. Not only the cylinders or the block houses cylinder, if it is a single cylinder engine, if it is multi cylinder engines, then of course multiple cylinders. Block also includes water jacket, so as to supply coolant through that jacket, and certain amount of heat can be transferred from the cylinder into the coolant, essentially to save a few mechanical components, other components from mechanical failure, from probable mechanical failure. and if it is an air cooled engine, then block includes exterior surfaces having some fins, extended structures. So, block includes exterior surfaces with extended structures so as to promote heat transfer. Next, if we go to discuss, that is again very important, that is camshaft. So, if we focus our attention over here, you can see there is a camshaft. What is this camshaft? So, you can understand that cam and follower mechanism is there. Perhaps if you try to recall, in one of the previous classes I had shown a schematic diagram to demarcate the to define several components, to give you a brief description about engine nomenclature, and then therein we had seen cam and follower mechanism. So, this is camshaft. So, this camshaft is essentially a rotating shaft. So, this is for the block, camshaft. So, this is rotating shaft used to push or open valves at a proper time in the engine cycle. So, this is camshaft. So, the shaft is a rotating shaft, it is used to push this valve to open the valve, because valves are closed by default, spring loaded valve. So, to open the valve at a proper time in the engine cycle, this rotating shaft, the camshaft, which is nothing but a rotating shaft, allows to push or open the valves. Okay. And how can this camshaft opens or pushes the valve? Through mechanical or hydraulic mechanism, mechanically or hydraulic linkage. So, this is either through mechanical stroke hydraulic linkage. So, that is what is the that is the purpose of having this camshaft. Okay. We shall discuss about the shape, material, all these things in the next class. So, today just you should know about this component, that is camshaft, which is used, which is nothing but a rotating shaft which is used to push or lift or open the valves through mechanical arrangement or hydraulic linkage. Okay. So, depending upon the requirement, most of the modern automobile engines have either 1, 2 camshafts. Next, we should go to the next slide. Here, another important part that we should now discuss is the combustion chamber. Just I am encircling this combustion chamber. So, what is this? Combustion chamber, that is, if I write here. So, this is the place where combustion occurs. So, this is that end of the cylinder. So, this part is the end of the cylinder. So, this is the end of the cylinder, and so this is the place between the end of the cylinder and piston face. or this is basically head. So, if I write this is the place between the end of the head we shall discuss little after, and piston face. Where combustion occurs. Now, try to understand. So, this is the head and piston face. So, the gap between these two components is the combustion chamber. Now, since the piston is moving or reciprocating between two locations that we have discussed in the previous class, essentially the combustion chamber, the space is also variable, it is not fixed. So, the combustion chamber, the space would be more when piston is at bottom dead center, and the space of the combustion chamber will be less when piston is at TDC. So, this is not a fixed space, that a variable space. Okay. Then we will be coming to discuss about another part, that is connecting rod. What is this? Let me write here. Connecting rod, what is this? So, you can see from the schematic depiction that the connecting rod connects piston with another shaft. So, just to transfer the energy which is available at the piston face into the shaft. So, the connecting rod is the linkage connecting piston with rotating crankshaft. Okay. So, the mechanical linkage which is used to connect piston with rotating crankshaft. So, connecting. So, the linkage connecting, so the name is connecting rod. That means, the purpose is to transmit the energy which is available on the face of the piston to the shaft, that is the crankshaft. Okay. So, next we can go to identify another important component, that is the crankcase. What is crankcase? So, the bottom part of the block that you can see from the schematic depiction. So, this is the block, this is the bottom part of the block. This crankcase houses this crankshaft that you can see from the schematic depiction. Not only that, it also connects oil pan. So, I will discuss this. So, if we go to the next slide, so that is the crankcase. So, crankcase, if we write now briefly, this is not separate, rather together these two keywords, crankcase. So, what is crankcase? Part of the engine block, right, surroundings the rotating crankshaft. That means, this is also a part of the engine block, but towards the end it houses the crankshaft, right, that is the crankcase, and with this I should write in many engines oil pan that you can see from this, schematic depiction, another important component, oil pan. So, in many engines oil pan makes up part of this crankcase. So, that is you should know. Okay. Then is the crankshaft. The next component that we should now look at is the crankshaft. So, let us write here. So, it is also a rotating shaft, and you can say that this connecting rod which is used to connect piston with the crankshaft. So, the crank is mounted on a shaft. So, this is also a rotating shaft through which engine work output is supplied to external system. Right. So, that means our objective is to convert the reciprocating motion of the piston into the rotary one, and that is done by or through the arrangement of crank and connecting rod mechanism. So, connecting rod which connects piston with the crankshaft, and that the energy is now converted or getting transmitted, not converted, getting transmitted to the crankshaft, and that shaft is also connected to an external system. So, the crankshaft is the crank is mounted on a shaft, that shaft is also connected to an external system. So, there is a offset distance. So, the connecting rod connects piston to the crank. The crank is mounted on the shaft, and that shaft is also connected to an external system, but the connecting rod connects the crank to the shaft, that is crankshaft, and that is essentially used to supply work output to the external system. So, again as I said you a few minutes back, we shall be discussing about their shape and also materials of several components in the next class. So, next is cylinder. If we now focus on this component, that is the cylinder. If it is a single cylinder engine, certainly one cylinder will be there. Otherwise, if it is a multi-cylinder engine, then multiple cylinders will be there. You can see this is basically cylindrical shape. If I write, this is circular cylinder in the engine block, which houses the piston, and inside the cylinder piston reciprocates. So, this is the cylinder. What next? Exhaust manifold. This is the component. So, if we write here, exhaust manifold. We have discussed that exhaust manifold is essentially a piping system through which combustion gases are allowed to leave from the combustion chamber during the exhaust stroke. So, this arrangement must be there, and that is what we can see from the schematic depiction. So, if we write now here exhaust manifold, that is piping system that is equipped to the block for the exhaust gases to leave, for the exhaust or leave from the cylinder. So, this is the exhaust manifold, right. Now, again we shall be discussing about the material of exhaust manifold and their arrangement in the next class. But you can see today that exhaust manifold is on the head of the engine, that is on the upper part of the block. Next we shall discuss about head, that is what we have already mentioned in the context of one component before. So, head. So, top part of the block that you can see, right. Probably we had mentioned somewhere here that this is the place between the end of the head. So, this is the head. So, end of the head and the piston face. So, this is the end of the head. Right. Okay. So, what is head? You can see that that is the top part of the block. The head also houses several other components. So, let us briefly write here head, right. This is the part that closes the end of the cylinder. Right, usually containing part of the clearance volume of the combustion chamber, usually containing part of the clearance volume of the combustion chamber. So, the part that you can see that closes the cylinder. So, basically this is the cylinder. Now, the cylinder end is this is cylinder end. So, the head closes the end of the cylinder. Not only that, a small part of this combustion chamber, that is the clearance volume, is also there in the head of the engine. Okay. So, that is the head. So, probably that just for your information, you also can see from the schematic depiction that in the head there are many other components. Valve is there, most importantly spark plug is there. So, if it is a SI engine, that spark plug will be there, or I can write here, or fuel nozzle. So, this is for the CI engine and spark plug for the SI engine. So, the head also houses spark plug if it is a SI engine, otherwise it will also include fuel nozzle or injector if it is a compression ignition engine. So, that is the head. Okay. So, let me complete the write up here. So, contains spark plug for a SI engine and a fuel injector for the CI and some SI engines. So, this is the head. Okay. So, if we go to the next, then we can identify another component, that is the intake manifold. So, this is also very important, you know by this time. Intake manifold, it is again a piping system which is used to supply fresh air if it is a CI engine or fuel air mixture if it is a SI engine to the engine cylinder. So, piping system which is used to supply air if it is for CI engine and air fuel mixture for the SI engine to the engine cylinder, right. Sometimes intake manifold also houses heating system so as to allow fuel to evaporate before it comes into the engine cylinder. Okay. Now, if it is a single cylinder engine, sometimes this intake manifold, this individual pipe to a single cylinder engine is known as runner. So, just I am writing the individual pipe to a single cylinder is called a runner. Okay. Next, very quickly we have to discuss about another a few major components. One is oil pan, that is we have already discussed. So, just I am writing oil pan. So, is oil reservoir essentially, oil reservoir usually fitted to the bottom of the engine block. Okay. And making up part of the crankcase, that is what we have discussed few minutes back. Okay. So, oil pan, you can understand that this is a oil reservoir which is usually fitted to the bottom of the block, making up a part of the crankcase, that is what we have discussed few minutes back. And essentially if you see the schematic, then you will understand that it acts like a reservoir or oil sump. Okay. Next is very important component, that is the piston. So, what is piston? Right, cylindrical shaped mass that reciprocates between two identified location. That is BDC and TDC. Okay. Now, top part of piston known as crown, very important. Side part is known as skirt. Side part of the piston known as skirt. So, this is what we have seen today. Then if we look at another important element is the piston rings. Let me briefly write here. Piston rings are very important. I told you that if we do not provide piston ring, there will be several problematic issues. What are those issues? First of all, piston material is very special, that we will discuss in the next class. Now, piston will reciprocate between two identified location. So, these two locations are BDC and TDC. Now, piston will move or reciprocate inside the cylinder. So, we need to reduce friction and wear. So, friction and wear, if we need to reduce so as to increase the life of the piston, we need to provide some piston rings in the outer periphery of the piston, right. And so, piston rings increase the lifetime of the piston. Not only that, try to understand, on the top of the piston entire combustion will occur, and then inside the cylinder pressure and temperature will be very high. In fact, pressure and temperature of the working substance. There will be a possibility that high pressure combustion products will leak through the passage between piston and cylinder inner wall into the crankcase. So, if we do not provide piston ring, that will be a probable case. So, piston rings are provided with the piston to increase piston's life and also to prevent or restrict the possible leakage of high pressure combustion gases through the passage formed between piston outer surface and cylinder inner wall, that gap. Okay. So, I am briefly writing. So, these are the metal rings that fit into circumferential grooves around the piston. Okay. And form a sliding surface against the cylinder wall. Now, typically close to the top of the piston, 2 or more cylinder rings are provided, right. Near the top, of the piston, 2 or more compression rings are provided. Right, and as I told you, these rings act like a seal so as to prevent or restrict the possible leakage of high pressure combustion gases into the crankcase through the gap between cylinder inner wall and piston outer surface. So, this is near the top surface, and below the compression ring, compression rings, one oil ring is provided, right. So, that oil ring is provided just to provide lubrication to the cylinder wall. So, below the compression ring, one oil ring is provided. The purpose of this oil ring is to supply sufficient lubrication to the cylinder wall. Okay. So, the next important element is piston rod, that you can see, that is or I should say push rod, not piston rod. So, this is push rod. So, what is push rod? Push rod is a mechanical linkage between camshaft and valves on overhead engine. With the camshaft in the crankcase, right. So, this is basically the push rod, because that the push rod essentially that rod is responsible to lift the valve by depending on the requirement, that is at a proper time in the engine cycle, and that connects the camshaft and valves and overhead. So, this is the camshaft, this is the valves to the crankshaft, because essentially the entire power is coming to the crankshaft. So, to operate the valve, to spring loaded valve, so to operate the valve we need to again have some energy, and that energy will come from the crankshaft. So, that is the push rod. And next is very quickly let us discuss about the spark plug that you had seen. So, spark plug, that is again an important element for the SI engines. So, it is electrical device which is used to initiate a high voltage spark between the electrodes. As such, we shall be discussing about the sparking circuit later of this course. So, the spark plug is an electrical device which is used to create or develop a high voltage spark across the electrode gap, and that is the spark plug. So, if I write here electrical device, okay, used to initiate combustion in SI engine by creating high voltage discharge spark across the electrode gap. Okay, for the sake of completeness I have written down here. So, now we have valves. If we go to the next slide, so we have valve that you can see from here, and we have water jacket. So, water jacket that already we have discussed, these jackets are basically attached to the cylinder in the block itself. In the block itself, this water jacket is attached to the cylinder wall, and through this water jacket, water as a coolant is supplied. So, when we are supplying coolant, it will reduce or it will take away certain amount of heat from the cylinder, and probably if we do not supply coolant, if it is a water cooled engine, or if we do not provide extended surface over the periphery of the engine cylinder, then excessive rise of temperature during combustion will allow several or will invite several problematic issues. So, this coolant is circulated through the water through cooling water jacket so as to reduce the temperature of the engine cylinder. And valve, you can see these valves, which the valves are provided to control the flow of air, flow of air fuel mixture, and also exhaust gases. So, these valves are given here, you can see, and that means flow of several fluids is controlled through the valve, and in most of the engines these valves are known as or used poppet valves. So, that is spring loaded valve. Initially it is spring loaded, so it will remain seated. We need to open using this mechanical linkage, that is through this cam and follower mechanism, either through mechanical linkage or hydraulic system. So, to summarize today's discussion, we have tried to know about several important or essential components of an engine, be it a SI engine, be it a CI engine. So, then we have tried to know about their functionalities, and also roughly today we have understood their arrangements. In the next class we shall discuss about their shapes, most importantly material used to construct those components in detail. So, with this I stop here today, and we shall continue our discussion in the next class. Thank you.